This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're talking to Owen Ó Súilleabháin, and we're going to talk about how can the genius of Ireland help our modern world today. And I want to thank you for being on the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Great to be here, Phantom Electric Ghost, with you and your listeners. I love the theme of your show, exploring, excavating the artifacts of creativity, which, of course, that is the story of my life. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for making the match.
So you established in 2024 the Inner Soul Circle. It's an online community focused on Celtic spirituality and the arts, along with your mom. And you've also worked in a lot of different fields like education, healthcare, corporate world, in the arts. You've worked with people like Steven Spielberg, Russell Crowe, Nigel Kennedy, and the Chieftains. So you're very much in the arts and other places, left, right brain type of person.
That's what I try. I try to be. I try to, yeah, keep the balance going. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
again, I'm in my day job is I'm a software guy, but then I'm
Okay.
in the arts, doing my podcasting, and then I do music. I'm with all my synthesizers here right now.
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, I'm a, I'm
Very
a
good.
I'm a synthesizer guy. I'm not a I'm an old school synthesist.
Nice, nice. Well, I also do music production with Logic, and I love mixing and the
Yeah.
music technology side of things too. Yeah, the whole experience. And so tell me, and this podcast, you're also very curious about the whole creative process, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I feel the creative process, it comes from a lot of different places,
Yeah.
and I'm very much into like flow state, in the moment, happy accident. But I'm willing to talk. I talk to people where maybe it's more, coming from a different place.
Yeah.
But I like
Mhm.
to understand, like when I talk to creative people, like what is their process? Because it's
Mhm.
different
Mhm.
for every person I ever talk to. I talk to
Mhm.
authors, I talk to film directors, I talk to painters, like anybody I talk to, it tends to be even an entrepreneur. They're
Yeah.
creative. They created a business. It's an entity. They came up with a vision. They come up with an idea. They come up with a process, a service, whatever. So I like to see the threading of like the needle. Like how do you pull things together?
Mhm.
That's been the focus. Is because I started with singer songwriters and I still talk to singer songwriters and artists, but I wanted to expand it because the world, I believe is very expansive. So I didn't want to get pigeonholed.
Very good, very good. Yeah, yeah, lovely. I love it. The exploration of creativity, I think, is so important because I think that like the greatest, most basic drive I think that we all have in this world is around creativity, which is really just a way of talking about love, I
Oh
think.
yeah.
It's about just making, giving love and receiving love and wanting to communicate in the most like the most authentic human level. It's like I want to show you something of my deepest self, the way that only I see the world. It's interesting you said, everyone's creative process is different and everyone's art is different. And that's really what it's all about. If people were making, if people went to that creative side of themselves and suddenly they were just generating, content, um, they wouldn't have this experience of giving and receiving love. I think that's the real basis of creativity. I think that's what it's all about. And that's why it's so important for everybody. And also it makes me very sad in our modern world today how so many of us are separated from our creativity. We believe
Oh,
creativity is for the creative professionals,
yeah.
or even worse, the entertainment industry,
Yeah, it's an industry. Well, I've always been a big proponent of the emerging independent artist that has that is willing to just throw it out on the wall, put it out into the ether, and not care, not try to be a clone master. Because I think a lot of people, like you talk to A&R people, or you talk to people like trying to understand the algorithm, is like, well, then what do? You copy in something about somebody else. Now I know everybody has an inspiration. I mean, I was inspired by Sun Ra, Prince, Hendrix, The Doors, whatever, Dylan. I'm inspired by a lot of people. Like it's all over the map. It's like I don't know where it's
Mhm.
going to come from, but I feel like we artists we channel our inner and outer worlds,
Yeah.
and our secret sauce is how we merge that with and produce something that is entirely new.
Mhm,
To me, that's
mhm.
what I like. I don't want to see somebody redo King Kong, redo Moby Dick, redo Citizen Kane. It's like, well, that was already done.
Yeah,
So what do I
yeah.
need to see that for?
And I think what happens is it gives purpose to the individual's life. Suddenly, we live in this terrible epidemic today of loneliness.
Mm,
And all of these subsequent, there's great research. I did a bit of, I've done work in the healthcare environments. And when I first started doing it, someone was telling me, oh, you should check out the medical research on loneliness. That there's actually a lot of research, medical research on the physiological, the disease effects of
mhm.
loneliness. And it's extremely extensive, up to the point where people in the United States say that loneliness is actually the biggest cause of illness.
Right, like, yeah,
And
I was a sociology major and like, yeah, me. Like the idea of not being connected or
yeah,
being on the outs, and
so
we're very tribal. So like you get kicked out of the tribe, then you're in that lonely space and the wolves attack you and you're like, you don't know. We're getting triggered by all these wolves.
that's
They're not
correct.
the
And
physical wolf, but
that's correct, and actually, and something close to my own heart is all that fight and flight mechanism in our physiology that gets confused by all of this isolation and fear, and it starts to shut down our body in interesting ways. Again, more great medical research on that front. So, creativity is so important because again, it's about that desire to want to connect with someone. And
yeah,
very often, creativity, as you were talking about influences, is taking two different things or many different things and sticking them together.
synthesize it, yeah.
Bringing things together. And so you're doing that with your creative process. But as you're doing it externally, you're doing it internally too. You're bringing parts of yourself together,
Very
that we
cathartic.
had separated. And so I think it's only healing. It's pure healing for people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very cathartic, and I'm part, Cherokee and, Blackfoot Indigenous Native American,
Wow.
and I'm African
Right.
American.
Where's that from? Tell me, Phantom Ghost.
Oh, it's coming from my father's side and my mom's side.
What part
So
of the country? What part of the
well
country?
well, I'm in the New England area, so my great-grandmother was a full-blooded Blackfoot. They happened
Okay.
to be relocated to New England, Massachusetts,
Okay.
and on my mom's side, out of West Virginia, she had Cherokee in her background. When her family traced, there was some Cherokee that had mixed
Okay.
with our family, like some of the slave, going back to slave days. We can trace back to our original name Jones was the slave master name, and then we traced some other things, and we found the history. But it's
Fascinating.
on both sides, male, my mom's side, my dad's side. But it's just like there's something about the indigenous cultures tend to have a lot of oral history
Yeah.
and a lot of Native Americans like just chanting and singing, and it actually was part of spirituality is of being, understanding the spirit animals, understanding the wind, the earth, the fire, everything is like in its place, but like having
Hmm.
respect,
Hmm.
not thinking you're above nature, which
Hmm.
tends to be a Western folly. But
And gets us into trouble.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah,
I
exactly.
try to pull from that, in my work, but
You mentioned too that thing about getting into the flow state, and seeing that too in your, I'm sure in your scientific, in your engineering work,
oh yeah, yeah,
how they feed into each other, and there was this great piece of research when I first started doing work with the arts in leadership and organizations, and there was this great piece of research that asked, hang on, it's been a while since I referred to it, so it was really complicated. Well, it's not complicated, but it's interesting. They took a study of scientists who'd won a Nobel Prize or included in the American Academy of Sciences. So very accomplished scientists.
mm,
They took a group of those, maybe like around 1,000 even. And then they took 1,000 of scientists who were not Nobel Prize winners
mhm,
or in the American Academy of Sciences. And they asked them what their avocations were. That was the word they used, avocations, which is like a fancy word for hobbies, what their hobbies were. And
yeah,
all of the award winning, the most prestigious scientists had many multiples of probability to practice the arts
wow,
across dance, music, creative writing, poetry, and they were practitioners. They would practice the arts
mhm,
and compared to the control study.
wow,
And yeah, it was fantastic piece. And of course, the classic trope or meme is Einstein playing the violin,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I
Uh,
think it's a really a big part of, and like when I talk to a lot of creative people, like even in the, like, the programming space, which is kind of like, oh, you guys are eggheads, or you guys are just mathematicians, you guys are just totally in the algorithms. But almost all the people I know in that creative space, a lot of them play guitar, they play sax, they do paint, they're painters, some do theater. Like they do have that other side. Because I think a lot of people are multifaceted, but we're told to say, an accountant, I'm a
yeah,
lawyer,
yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
scientist. You only can be one thing to like
Hmm.
the outside world,
Hmm.
but like in your true like self, you're wearing a lot of hats.
Hmm. Hmm. I think, yeah, and I think when we start to separate these things in society and in ourselves, we start to feel the feeling of isolation, of alienation within ourselves, of purposelessness starts to creep in, and people go, "What am I doing with my life?" And the people who are doing these things and yet running home and tinkering with their whatever it is at home or playing their music or whatever, things just kind of make sense when you start to.
Well, you don't have time to be so like in the downs. Like if you give yourself other things, like you you not that you won't be depressed as an artist, because a lot of times melancholy is where the art comes from, right? But the thing is, like, a person who's melancholy doesn't know how to process it, and it is just stuck in in their room.
Mhm,
They're alone in their room. They don't connect. They can't figure out how to soothe themselves. That's why I say it's very cathartic if I sit at the piano, and even if I was feeling bad, it'll turn into something. Or I sit on a wind instrument, and it will turn into something.
mm,
And it will turn whatever I was processing into that feeling. And actors do it, painters do it, anybody who's an artist, authors do it. They figure out how to channel that into something that's like, that keeps you from, it makes you want to get up the next day and do it again.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And those, as you mentioned too, melancholy, those negative emotions in our society as well too. There is such a culture of running away from these things, medicating these things, analyzing these things to death.
Yeah, I'd rather
And
just
actually,
another
what we should be doing is simply feeling those things, because that's what they're there for. We've spent the whole cosmos. Would have to happen again for these emotions to occur. We've evolved these emotions for very particular reasons.
Yeah,
I just heard the great mystic and sage, the great American mystic, Jim Carrey, the actor, and
yeah.
he was given an interview. He's a madman, but he's a great student of life, and so interesting things come out of his mouth. And he was referring to a teacher of his who talked about depression, and he was saying how the word depressed really should be pronounced deep rest,
Deep
and
rest.
we should have deep rest. It's our body telling us you need to stop impersonating that actor, that mask within you. And
Hmm.
that's hard because we spend all our lives perfecting this character, that I
It's
am
like,
now,
yeah,
that you
the
are
math.
here. And
Yeah.
depression actually is the emotion, he's saying, of the body saying, I can't be that person anymore. And you have to break down in order to find a new role for yourself, a new identity, So, depression, what are you going to do? Are you going to medicate it? Are you going to, analyze it to death? Or what about looking at it as a tool, as something to take you to where you need to go? Not easy, not easy. And all of the arts show us how devastating, and spirituality shows us how devastating, depression and grief and loneliness and isolation are. But always there's a story after that story, There's, be it a resurrection of some sort, a redemption, a renewal comes through the fire of these terrible, terrible emotions. Yeah. But they have
With
a
the looking, yeah.
function.
With the looking glass self. Like I was always into a lot of the Victorian poets. So
Oh,
getting into, Wordsworth, Longfellow, Keats, like
Oh,
Hawthorne. And the idea of the looking glass self was always appealed to me. And I'm a big fan of, William Blake. And I was
okay.
always reading like Songs of Innocence Experience and a lot of his, etched on acid metal plates that the Songs of Innocence Experience actually have, paint, matched metal artwork that goes with each poem. And he felt the need to make it permanent in that way. And he wasn't like known in his time. He's one of the greatest Victorian poets, but he's known after that time because they found him in like a barn. And like,
Amazing.
and it's just the idea that he felt that it was important to put that work into something that was permanent, like metal. And I was like, well, to me, that was a great statement as an artist. Is that I'm gonna, even though if I'm not famous in my time, I feel these things. This is important, and people should kind of take a lesson from that. It's like you shouldn't just keep it inside. You got to bring it out into the world.
Even if no one's watching, yeah, or with the prospect of no one even ever seeing it, like an unconditional art, like unconditional love. You're looking for nothing in return, and
Just the
just
act of doing it.
believing in it,
Yeah, the act of
believing in it,
creating
yeah,
it is just
believe in it,
is important.
believe in it for its own sake. Yeah, believe in it for its own sake. I got a fancy. I treated myself to an upgrade to my studio. I was telling you I do a bit of music production as well,
Yeah, I see all your guitars.
and I love recording and that whole thing. And I'm not a professional at it. I'm a great enthusiast. I hire professionals when I need them, but I love tinkering with it. So I upgraded my studio and last December, and I decided I would just let myself run riot and just like make whatever music I wanted. No project, no concert, no, just do whatever I wanted. And it was really funny. All of this kind of like 80s yacht rock came out,
Came out.
like Alan Parsons Project, ELO, kind of,
All good stuff. Oh, like I'm a Yes guy. I'm an Emerson, Lake and Palmer guy. Like I love Genesis, but then
Gen-
I'll go
yes,
Peter Gabriel's version of Genesis. Like
Peter Gabriel. Oh my God. And like,
Foxtrot.
and when you're listening to that music, the music technology, the audio production was cutting edge at the time. That's a lot of that genre was these nerds. They were engineers. Alan Parsons was an engineer.
Yeah,
Alan Parsons actually engineered the Pink Floyd uh, Dark Side of the Moon album. He was an
yeah, that's a
engineer on
great.
that and
Yeah,
was really into. Some of these guys were able with the soldering irons and making new
when they're playing with
technology.
the EMS VC3, and I'm a synth head, so I'm like they're playing, and they're playing with the different tunings on their pianos, and they're using the studio as an instrument, like George
Oh,
Martin.
and when
Taking it
you
to another level.
and when you hear like Phil Collins drums, the sound of his drum kit,
Yeah.
like nobody had sounded like that. The level of perfection that the technology had gotten. So I got this nice Mac computer, and it can take, like um, all the latest plugins, and so I was downloading them all and messing around with it. And my idea was, no one's going to hear these songs. I'm never going to play them to anybody. They're just for me. So I'm sitting on now an EP of.
But that's the way you do it. To me, you just create it and you don't know where it's gonna come from. I was like into the idea, like Zappa and Neil Young, like with Crazy Horse, they would just let the tape roll.
Mhm.
Or, because Crazy Horse, Tonight's the Night was this big, like was on a big reel to reel that
Okay.
the band Crazy Horse was just putting all this stuff down. They didn't even know if it was the record, right? And they just like it was really raw. It was kind of like Time Fades Away is really raw too. And they're like, well, this is not. I don't know if this is ready for prime time, but it's like there's something about when you're willing to put something out for like art's sake because it
Mm.
makes a statement and like he's got that scratchy voice. It's like he's kind of like it's a little. There's a lot of emotion in it.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot, and something about that is like you don't. It doesn't need to be perfect. It's like the happy
Oh,
accident. Sometimes the vulnerability is what
yeah.
you want.
That's such an interesting point, and I love that, because one of the things I love to do with music technology too is like try to get it perfect. That yacht rock genre, they perfected every single note.
Yeah, they're really into
There
it.
wasn't one, but you look at someone like Neil Young, and I often think some people talk to me about, oh, I can't sing. or I can't play music. And really what they're saying is they had a traumatic experience when they were a kid.
Yeah.
And some terrible teacher said, "Oh, shut up. That's the
Can't do
worst.
it.
You stand in the back and be quiet." That's what they're saying. And then, so I often tell them, listen, I've heard your story before. I've heard it a million times. And the other thing is, I say to them, imagine, just picture Bob Dylan or Leonard
Yeah.
Cohen.
Somebody tell Dylan he can, like Lou Reed,
Oh,
like
you,
Dylan and Lou, both of them are like really like at the cutting edge of, they're singer-songwriters. They're poets. They were allowed to be popular singers, or get into the pop
yeah,
area, and they're really writers. They're really poets. They were able to get away with it because of the times that people accepted it and said, "Oh yeah, you don't have to be Nat King Cole. You don't have to be Johnny
that's
Mathis.
it.
You can actually be Dylan."
Yeah.
That was like
Isn't,
revolutionary. That you
isn't
could
that,
have
yeah.
somebody with Dylan's voice actually getting a record out on Columbia.
It's amazing. And then he wins the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Well, yeah, if you read it, I mean, I've got like every Dylan thing. I got the 10 hours of the basement tapes with Robbie and the boys, with the band. And like, I was always obsessed with the way they wrote songs. So I
Okay.
actually was into the recording of those, everything that became the released basement tapes is like a
Yes.
scrubbed basement tapes. But
Right.
I've got like the 10-hour version of the
Okay.
original stuff that's not scrubbed. Right, so
Okay.
it's stuff in the basement with the guys at Big Pink, and that stuff to me is just, you see Dylan's process with Robbie and the band. To
Beautiful.
me, that's very, it's instructional
Yes.
as a songwriter to see them
Beautiful.
going through the takes and the
Mm.
versions of these songs, and it's like there's so much stuff there. To me, it's like that's what I want to hear. I don't want to hear it perfect. I want to hear that.
Yeah. It's it's so interesting, that process. And I often joke with people, I say, imagine Bob Dylan walking into a music examination, where he's being, he has to do his vocal, his scales and his arpeggios.
He's gonna feel it. He's gonna feel it. Well, like, even I had an engineer that worked on Blood on the Tracks, like the version that didn't come out, that later came out later. I actually had him on the show,
Okay.
and that's
What
the
do you
one where,
say?
well,
Yeah.
he was talking about how he really liked that version, and a lot of people, when the bootleg came out, they really liked the version that he worked on, which is not the overly produced version. It's got just a bass player, maybe slight drums, slight piano. It's not overdubbed. And it was like the original intent. And the thing, like Dylan would come in and he wouldn't really tell people what the song was.
Okay.
So he wouldn't give people a chance to learn it. And then he would continue to like change it. And it makes it really hard. You really got to sink in with Dylan.
Yeah.
You could be like Robbie. Robbie could, like, he could sink in and figure it out. Like, not everybody can do that with Dylan, because like if you don't, then you're out.
Very, and very similar process to Van Morrison would do the same thing. I knew musicians who worked with him, and he would walk in and he would just start, and you'd have to follow. Like, he wouldn't even give a key. He'd just
Yeah,
have some song he'd been
you
working
gotta
on.
get it. If you don't get it, you're not gonna get it. There's something about that. I like the vibe. I'm kind of like, when I play with guys, is like I don't like to give them the chord chart. I
Cool.
like,
Okay.
I don't. I kind of just like, can you vibe with it or
Just
not?
vibe.
If
Yeah.
you can vibe, and it's kind of like, they don't want to be a jerk, but sometimes you know what you want, and you know what who you resonate
Mm-hmm.
with.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
if you get a band where everybody kind of, you can just like nod your head and they kind of get it, and I let the drummer figure out, what's going to
Mm-hmm.
work. Let the bass player
Mm-hmm.
figure out what's going to work. And I
Mm-hmm.
have stuff where I know I could give them all the parts, but
Sure.
sometimes I want to see, like, I wrote something, but what is this guy going to do if I just give him my part and I don't
Mm-hmm.
give him the bass part? And some people are real, like, they want to
Mm-hmm.
know what the part is. I'm like, no, let me see
Yeah.
what you do.
I mean,
And then,
and that's what, from a recording perspective, like that's what you're trying to get. You're not trying to get a technically perfect record. You're trying to get the vibe. Like, all the best recordings have that vibe. They have the groove, and that's not gotten through learning shit and writing it down. And that's gone through what you're talking about: people in a room vibing and getting into a groove and pressing record at just the right time. And
yeah,
that's, you end up with this magic recording. That's why it can't be reproduced. That's
yeah,
why, like, Paul McCartney's latest albums are like a chore to listen to. Like,
yeah, they're not what they did
Why can't Paul McCartney consistently write hits? Like, it should be that easy, if you're that good, you should be able to do it. But there's something else, that magic where you've got to let go and just be part of some shared field.
Yeah,
But
you got
it's
to be like in the zone. Like sometimes you look at big people when they're at their certain, like at their greatest effort, like their most peak period, and sometimes it just flows. Like if you look at like Jimi Hendrix in his first three records, it was just going boom, 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 this progression. Once you get to
mm,
Electric Ladyland, he's like, oh my god.
mm,
Like you go from Are You Experienced to Electric Lady, and he's like in this pre-fusion, like
mm,
it's like progressive
mhm,
rock.
mhm,
It's really like this guy is really reaching,
mhm,
and that
mm,
album is like unbelievable even to this day. I look at it and I listen to it. I'm like, this guy was really in this place, and it was because
mm.
he was this master player, he was playing all the time, and he was like that was his thing. It's like he was not to party, but to like be one with the guitar and actually go as far as you can. It's like
Yeah,
a Davis, like a
yeah,
Coltrane. That's where he's
yeah,
going.
yeah. And probably surrounded by a certain team too at a certain time.
Well,
Um,
Mitch knew what to play with him. Mitch
right.
Mitchell could like he just automatically knew, and Hendrix just loved him. He kept him like almost every iteration except for the Gypsies. He
Amazing.
was like almost every iteration of any band that Hendrix had with Mitch Mitchell was
Mm.
just there. And then Billy Cox later, like he was the guy that he had actually worked with in the army. But yeah, he's just like you got to find people that that you vibe with.
Yeah. And that's it. That's coming back to this thing of like creativity, art for me is just like an outward expression of relationship, of love, of trust, of community. That's what's important. That's what's going on, and the art is secondary. That's a result. That's like a symptom. It's a
Yeah,
secondary thing, and when people focus on that as the primary thing, suddenly they're doing something and they're not necessarily happy about it anymore. But the
no,
primary thing is about people. It's about the connection, and it's about the. So I've had the great privilege, and I've really invested of working with my family,
mm,
with my
yeah,
mother,
your
my
mother.
brother, and I don't know if you've ever been in a family business, but often people who have will have a wry, knowing smile when they meet someone else in a family business that you're a great survivor of difficult situations. But uh, I wouldn't have it any other way, and of course, say if you're talking about singing. There is a sound, a vibration that you get in family bands that you cannot
Yeah,
rehearse.
with the Allman
Brothers
Brothers,
bands,
like the
yeah,
Allman
brothers,
Brothers.
yeah, brothers
Greg
band, and of
and
course,
Allman, they're just like they've been in sync.
or the Everly Brothers is another
Yeah,
classic sound. The Gallagher Brothers at Oasis, like there's just all
yeah,
these brothers bands, the Proclaimers too. And me and my brother have had this extraordinary privilege to sing with our mother, Nóirín, and she's a soprano, and I'm sort of bass baritone. My brother's tenor baritone, and we
must
just
really
make
thick
this
frequency must be
beautiful
like
blend.
really there.
Ah, it's
Especially
gorgeous.
with like Motown, like when you get these Motown bands like Four Tops and Temptations and
I know. Yeah,
Janet
it's
Smokey and the
exactly.
Miracles, like when you have those voices all coming together, Delphonics, you get this like, oh, is this, and you don't hear people doing that anymore as much.
This
You
is
don't hear people actually taking vocal groups and actually focusing on that character, those voices,
Yeah,
because
and
they're in.
families, families. It used to be before we had all this technology and shit. Like families would play music together,
Yeah, that's true.
um, and it's just not as common today. And there's nothing you can do. It's amazing to work with your family because you only need to rehearse like 1/10 of the time it takes to rehearse with non-family people.
Yeah,
You just
yeah.
got it in one
You
or
just get
two
it
goes.
together. But yeah, it's just something about if you've got to sync, if you're synced up. Like my brother played guitar with me in one of my first basement bands, and
Nice.
we were kind of in sync. Well, he played guitar and I played boards, and then we got
Okay.
a drummer and we had bass player. But like because we were like really in sync in terms of like he knew what to go, what guitar parts to go with what my keyboard parts were, and
Okay.
it's something that that thing is like my brother knew what to do. I didn't have to tell him. he just kind of knew what to do. I have the other guys in the band. I'd have to tell him what I wanted.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And so it's also hard to play that with other people. So I've really had such a great. I've always just known the value of it, and so my go to in my work, in my performance, has always been with my family, and it's
That's
great.
good. Man.
I have a 3-year-old son now, and he is so musical. It's crazy. I keep having to tell people I'm not pushing this. This is
No,
not.
he's just doing
He
it.
is like he's only 3, but like already I can see. You can see as a musician,
Yeah, you can see it
he's
coming.
way more into music than I was. That's all he does all day long, and I just think to myself, oh, imagine someday being able to, to jam with him, and perform with him,
It's such a cool connection, like the connection of music, or like when you have, because it's a nonverbal thing
Yeah.
sometimes,
Oh
that
yeah.
when you're with a group and
Uh,
you're getting in tune, like you guys can look at each other and you can
mm,
nod ahead, get a look in the eye,
mm.
and you just smile because when it's like, yeah, you're hitting that, you're in the groove, you're in that zone.
It's
And when you
so
get in that
nourishing.
zone, it's like it's hard to explain to people that don't, other than like if you're in a you're in a sports team and you're
Mhm.
working and you make that play and you don't have to actually talk about it. You kind of, everybody knows their
Yeah,
role and it comes together. But it's the same
exactly.
type of thing, right?
Exactly. And so like some people might be listening and go, "Oh, I can't sing," or "I'm not in a group," or whatever, but actually anyone can join a community choir, and there's choirs of all abilities, and you get the same feeling even in the most, under rehearsed crazy choir. My mom last year, she's 73 years old now, and she decided she was going to, she's always coming up with these ideas. Every time I call her, there's a new idea. This was her latest one last year. I called her and she said, I'm setting up a choir. I'm setting up a choir. And it was a choir for senior singers. And
Right.
they called it the Gray Hairs. And so for the last year, well, say the last 6 months or so now, they have been meeting once every 2 weeks, and they come together, they sing together, and then they have the cup of tea and they all chat and talk and, break into conversational partners and have a great time. But it's all about community, and they're singers of all abilities, I can tell you, and even no ability at all, and they come together religiously for this
But it
choir.
gives you purpose because, like, if you just, you don't want to just be, sitting there watching watching the TV,
Mhm.
just like on the net. And, if you get people into like music and you get them into a choir, you actually get them to
Yeah.
say, hey, you could create a jazz band. You guys, you go and do something, right? Could connect and actually
Mhm.
have a community, do it, even do plays. Like you talk to like
Oh yeah.
people who are actors and like do little one act plays.
Oh
Do
yeah.
little, go and do something, that don't just sit there and watch a tube.
It's it's great, and of course, I believe too. It's a radical act these days to come together in person. That the forces that be, the world that we have constructed around us actually wants us to be isolated. It wants us to sit alone, with our Netflix subscription. With every person
Yeah,
in the
binge,
house watching their own thing.
watch some show.
Everybody watching their own thing. And so the world that we've constructed right now wants us to be separated. And so coming together is today, it's actually an
Radical.
act of defiance. You're saying, I'm not being part of this society that we've constructed around us. It's a very radical thing to come together in person.
Yeah, would actually go back, in the day, go to CBGBs, go watch it like at the Talking Heads, David Byrne, show up there with Patty Smith and, the Ramones and television. It's like the idea, or go see Parliament Funkadelic and actually see that Parliament and P Funk. I mean, like to go and see that is, it's not like, going to see some DJ on the CDJ, like just running Parliament stuff. Actually, go and
Mhm.
see Parliament play.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like there was this thing about connecting to that in itself.
Mhm.
It's like, oh my gosh,
And of
and
course, all those people you referenced, that's all social movements. Those were countercultures to the great narrative of power at the time. Those were countercultural movements. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just feel people need to have like the whole punk aesthetic. I was very much into what the Clash, Joe Strummer and
Okay.
the Clash, right? And they're the only band that mattered. This idea, they because they were there's like he was like Joe Strummer's had like a Dylan, in terms of like I don't have to have perfect pitch, I just have to have passion for something I
Hey,
believe in, right? And just
let's.
do it.
I mean, if you're talking about Joe Strummer, how about we let's go back to Muddy Waters on this one,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
the
yeah,
Chi-
the
the
blues.
Chicago Blues, really. I think in a way recently, I haven't heard a lot of people these days talk about the radical breakthrough of Chicago blues, where the blues met again audio technology. It was the
Mhm.
blues meeting the recording technology. Those recordings, the quality of some of those recordings
Or
from
Lead
way
Belly,
back,
Robert
it
Johnson,
was
and all that stuff is like
it was
really awesome.
beautiful. Some of those recordings, really warm and full, analog,
Well, the analog's
beautiful.
great. Like when you catch a bluesman, like you get Lead Belly, Robert Johnson, that stuff, and you hear it, and then later you get like all the Kings, all the different Kings, BB King, you
The
know,
Kings.
yeah, there's multiple Kings, right? It's like and so the idea of the blues is this, is everybody the pentatonic scale, but everybody approaches it a different way. So they
Hmm.
they come at it and it's like it's not the same song, right? It's not the same
Hmm.
idea. It's like how you approach it is very
So
very
different.
different.
So different. Oh my god! And then you hear, yeah. I mean, you hear. I remember, when I came of age, I was big into Nirvana and
Mhm.
grunge when I was a kid. I
Oh,
was listening to
Sub Pop. I love everything on Sub
big
Pop.
albums that blew my mind. When I was 11, 12 years old. That's it. When puberty hits in, 11, 12, 13. It was Billie Jean by Michael Jackson and Dangerous, the album Dangerous.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, Nevermind dropped. Nirvana Nevermind. Metallica's Black Album.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
all of those three albums hit me at the same time.
All
Yeah, and I
hits you
was
at the same time.
totally
I was like
electrified.
Purple Rain was a big thing for me, but
Prince.
I loved like Sign of the Times. I thought that was in Parade where I liked it when he wasn't doing what everybody expected. Like there were certain Prince
Oh,
fans that only like 1999 and Purple Rain.
yeah.
I was more
Oh,
like I like Sign of the Times, Parade, and the stuff that came later. Like I like the
he,
fact that he was willing to go different places
he
and
was
show his depth,
he was
kind of like a
he
Bowie.
was operatic. He was just operatic. Prince is, I
Yeah.
think, one of the greatest musicians of pop music recorded history. Like, technically, his technical virtuosity.
Well, he's the most
Uh,
one of the most experimental pop stars to actually make it. A guy that is willing to do very experimental music that wasn't
hmm.
normal pop,
Hmm.
wasn't normal rock, wasn't even normal funk. It was like he created like his own
His own
version.
thing.
Yeah, I mean, he took the inputs of like Kraftwerk and Parliament and Sly and Hendrix, and then came up with the Minneapolis sound. And it's like, wow, that's
The
like he came up with a
Minneapolis
whole
sound.
new sound
The
coming from that, and
Minneapolis
it's
sound.
not the same.
It's
You
amazing.
can see where it comes from, but it's not the same.
And then, of course, you have to add the visual, the look, the dance, the
Yeah,
costume, the dress,
it's the whole
um,
thing. It's like
all
a little
e-
Richard and Hendrix all at once with Jagger and everything else.
everything, and all of that is coming from his own genius too. I love watching that, the gesture, the choreography, the movement of it all. Like, all you'd have to do is see a silhouette of Prince, and it's him.
Yeah, well, they learning that the visual is really important. Bowie was into the theatrics.
Bowie too,
He
genius.
knew he knew that you had to have something because when he didn't, when he was David Jones and he came out without being Ziggy, without being Thin White Duke, without being Aladdin Sane, it didn't work. Nobody wanted. So when he figured out that, like, oh, he look into himself and say, I need to bring theater into rock. I need to bring characterizations into rock and actually, be like a an actor,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
method actor on stage.
Yeah. Opera.
And,
It was opera. Yeah. Yeah, fascinating stuff. So great. Oh my good. You're great fun. You're great fun, Phantom Electric Ghost. We could be talking. This is something. And I work with I bring this work into the world of leadership coaching, is a small part of the work that I do. I'm absolutely blessed to work with some great leaders of organizations. And I tell them that this conversation we're having right now, how common is this among musicians? Like the minute you meet another musician, like we
Yeah,
could
that's
talk
where we
about
go.
this for 3 hours.
We go
And
into
God
it.
help us if we started to actually play each other music. It would be
Yeah,
3 hours,
it's
4 hours.
long. But when
So,
you got a passion, it's like you find a way to equate that passion to whatever you're doing, right?
absolutely. And so I say to people in organizational life, I say, listen, I know you're as passionate about this because you wouldn't have gotten to a leadership position if you didn't have that passion. And you need someone to talk like this with. You need someone to geek out with. Because this is a very important part of the creative process that I've seen. I've grown up with musicians and I've seen them. We need to talk like this to
Talk
sort
shop.
of,
Yeah, you kind of talk
isn't
your
it?
shop.
There's something important happening when the two of us start, just fucking ranting and raving like this. And
Oh
I
yeah.
say to people in every walk of life, like you have many things that you're passionate about, and you have to find someone to share that passion with. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's interesting because like I was in corporate world for a while working with Fortune 500s, and I've now
Oh,
gone into working with more like startup,
okay.
entrepreneurial, smaller companies.
Okay.
And I made a choice to go with the smaller guys
Yeah.
because I like the fact that they're very passionate.
Ah,
Like in the smaller, what I saw with the smaller entrepreneur, the startup mindset was
yeah.
more like a band.
Yeah.
I could see like it's more like like the Husker Du or the Replacements or like
Dude.
they're in the Econo line band and they're trying to get it done. And everybody's wearing a hat like, oh, tonight I'm going to be the engineer. I'm going to fix the sound. You do whatever you need to do, and you're passionate because it's your thing, right? You have a vision, you have a stake in it. You don't feel like you're a cog in the machine. You feel like
Mhm.
you're actually, if you say something, it's going to be valued.
Mhm.
If you
Mhm.
propose something, you're going to get listened to. Versus like if it's a bigger thing, it's like, oh, maybe the board will approve it
You're
to
part
even
of a
talk about
machine.
it and then throw it
Yeah.
away.
Yeah, it's a different beast. Yeah. That's wonderful. That's great. And so did you make that like conscious decision to move away from big corporate
Yeah, well,
stuff?
yeah, well, because I actually had worked in Japan for a big company, for like a Fortune 500, and I came back and I really didn't want to leave Japan. I
Okay.
wanted to stay there, and they wanted to move me. And I'm like, well, these guys are not really in line with what I want to do. And I started making moves to like get out of because suddenly it was like it was just I had to be totally aligned with them, and I wasn't totally aligned.
Mhm.
And I had to start saying, well, what do I want? And if it's not really aligned with what I want to do, I need to actually make the move to find
Yeah.
my tribe, to find a group of
Excellent.
people who actually are more in line and not just treat it like, if you treat it like, oh, it's a 9 to 5 and I don't have to be aligned. But I want to I want to know when I'm there that I'm actually passionate about what I'm doing, and I don't
Yeah.
want to just phone it in.
Well, like, and again, like I work with people, like very competent people, and everybody finds it so hard to leave an organization, regardless of how competent you are. But some people find it more easy than others. And I believe it's people who do invest in creativity, in bringing parts of themselves together so that there is a self esteem within you that allows you to be articulate about your situation like that. And you have confidence to step outside of that. So I would venture that your curiosity in the arts and your commitment, your discipline to the arts allowed you to move on and find yourself and be deliberate and articulate about where you want to go.
Yeah, you end up being less risk averse because,
Yeah,
like, to me, the risk is phoning it in.
I
The
believe so. Yeah. And I think creativity, exercising the creative muscle allows you to make those moves. Yeah, have that courage.
and it's hard because, like,
It's hard.
to me, it's like, well, the problem is like people want to get to be an expert of what they're, and that's you get to 10,000 hours or whatever you do, you get to be an expert, and then you can kind of get to this plateau. Now, the people who continually want to evolve, they'll go and they'll dip their toe into something that they don't really fully have a hold on. to evolve more. So you've got to go somewhere. And I think Bowie said this. Sometimes he didn't feel good as a great as an artist unless he was treading water a little bit
Okay.
to push like to the next thing. So you can get to this plateau like Ziggy. You can stay in that and say, no, I'm actually going to do the Young Americans. I'm going to work with Luther Vandross. I'm going to do some kind of soul thing. But that's
Mm-hmm.
not what you were doing. So it
Mm-hmm.
means you're going to probably have some discomfort. You don't
Oh
know
yeah.
exactly how to deal with that genre. You're not, you got to go and you got to retrain yourself. Not everybody wants to have to retrain themselves
No, no,
because
and
that's
like,
hard.
and the people around you, with the best of intentions, will say, "What are you doing? Don't do that. Don't do that."
Yeah. Because you had something working. Why won't you just stay? And some people want to stay with the thing that worked for 20 years. Like my pop, that's my pop stayed as like an insurance sales manager 20 years. I've been bouncing around. My brother bounced around. Like we're in the, I don't know, my generation tends to be more willing to bounce than
Hmm.
my father, and my uncles and my aunts.
Hmm.
They all stay with companies like 20 years. And we're like, I couldn't do that. I can't do
Yeah,
that.
it's great. It's great. Yeah, and perhaps things. Yeah, perhaps things are changing. It's interesting to see kind of cultural norms shift, regardless of what's going on the big media national side of things. The people that I'm meeting good people all the time, and I'm meeting people of younger generations who very regularly and frequently we have very similar kind of ways of looking at the world that I'm proud of, and I have hope for, regardless of this terrible messaging and divisiveness that is all around us.
Well, yeah, I mean, living in the States right now, it's kind of like it's like people seem to be anti-creativity and more into um status quo, whatever they think that is. But the idea is like they're looking backward. Like
Hmm.
I remember like growing up and reading about Kennedy talking about going to the moon.
Hmm.
And then listening to Martin Luther King speeches and watching like Greenpeace and people who were environmental activists and people that's thinking like we can do better.
Hmm.
We can do something. There's forward thinking. They're very creative. That the America's not done.
Hmm.
But then we got this
Hmm.
idea like we got to go back to
Hmm.
1780. We got to go back before 1864.
Yeah.
You're not really thinking about going to 2030. You're going back to 1730. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
what are you
Hmm.
doing?
Hmm. But that's this, and I say, like, I don't meet anybody, like, I don't work with anybody, like the people I'm working with, the people I'm meeting with, are people like yourself, who I'm proud to be associated with. I'm proud to be alive at this time with the people that I get to talk to and meet. And I think it's important for me to restate that message often, because I think that it's situations like this, like, I see what you're doing as a radical act. It's a form of social justice, what you're doing here. It's a redress to the imbalance in society, to the injustice. Justice is always shown holding a weighing scales,
Yeah.
and when something goes out of balance, there needs to be a counterweight
Yeah.
to
There's
it, a counter.
historically, we've seen it. If you go through periods and you get an imbalance in like, the people at the top. You've seen it in multiple societies. Go back to French Revolution, there was a big imbalance. You go back to 1929, super big imbalance. Anytime you go to any society where they have these inequities, then you'll have like there ends up being a consequence. There ends up being a shift. And we're going through like a very imbalanced situation. And even globally, there's these imbalances now. People seem to have lost the lessons of the 1930s and 40s. There was a lesson that was taught during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people don't read history. They don't read. They don't seem to understand what happened. They don't. If you don't pay attention to your past, and you end up you're going to be damned to repeat it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like we're living right now in the States, like people, there are groups of people that understand what happened in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want to see that happen again. There's some people that are just clinging to that for their resentments and their grudges, and they still talking about the Civil War. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, really? You're still there? That's where you are? But that's where they are. So I mean,
Yeah.
I have to know where they are. You have to have situational awareness to know where people are and say, okay, I actually have got eyes open and I know where you are. So let's see where we can go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for me, creativity is the way to exercise a free mind. And it's unassailable. It cannot be locked up. It cannot be silenced. It's unstoppable, actually. Yeah. And again,
Well,
great
that's why they always
examples.
want to lock the artist up. In society, when you see something going wrong, then they like you ban the book, you ban the artist, you ban the show, you
Hmm.
ban the piece of art
Hmm.
because artists have a lot of power, and a painting has a lot of power, a book has a lot of
It
power,
does.
like your words have power. There are people who think the words don't have meaning. I'm like, where have you been?
Amen, Phantom Electric Ghost. You have summed up the hidden agenda of my work is to try to teach and encourage others that creativity is the source of human power. It's the engine room of all of our aspirations and hopes and dreams.
Yeah,
And the more that we can encourage people to lean into this, even in the smallest little way, that's my little bit of work done for the day. That's all I can do, you know. And
well, you
that's
have your link there for your website. If people click on that, is that how you're one of your
that's right.
programs?
Another little part of our work is we have an online virtual community. We base it around another thing we didn't talk about too is nature and the connection to the natural world, of course, you
Oh
know.
yeah, we probably
And
could
so
do that in
we
a second
we
episode.
we hook into the old Celtic, the old Irish Celtic kind of traditions. And of course, they were based like all of the native indigenous traditions, based on the calendar of the seasons
Hmm.
within their location. And so the Celts had this great seasonal calendar, four great festivals, and so we base our journey around that, and that's the theme of each gathering. And so it's an online gathering. We come together live once a month, and then we send out materials based on that particular time of the year. And each live gathering, we do breakout rooms where we put you into conversational pairs randomly with somebody. And it's always great fun. And people have a great old conversation and make friends. And we have an online platform as well, too, called Circle. It's an app on your phone and you can message people and keep in touch with people. So that's one thing. We bring people to Ireland is another thing to
Oh
actually
wow,
have like week-long experiences. Me, my brother, and my mom, and we stay in one place and we make a little community for a week, and we do day trips and have morning sessions of poetry and song and conversation, and then we have gorgeous meals together in the evening. A local chef comes in and makes our food. That's really twice a year we do that, and that's really two of the greatest weeks of my work every year that I look forward to. And then we perform around the country, working with art centers, universities, and organizations too, bringing the arts into leadership, organizational development. The whole side of corporations are starting to value the arts more and more in all sorts of interesting and creative ways. So that's something I really look forward to always, is engaging with an organization and seeing how my artistic knowledge can actually interface and solve problems that people are having in their professional lives, you know. So
I
that's a
think that's
little.
a good alternative to like allowing people to have a retreat that maybe allows them to lean into this, into like what you're talking about with what you're doing with your programs. That to me is like a very positive thing to do, and it's experiential, and it gets people tied to their to a voice that maybe they didn't know they had, or voices that they didn't know they could listen to and actually resonate with. So I
Absolutely.
want to thank you for what you've done. We probably need to have another episode to go into everything that we could talk about, but
Uh hey, so great to meet you. Yeah, yeah. My God, we could definitely we could keep going for another 3 or 4 hours now for sure.
thank you again for being on the show.
Yeah, and yeah, let's keep in touch.
Thank you very much.